Hey everybody, it's Aaron, and I want to talk to you today about graceful patch switching in Ableton. Now, as a longtime Mainstage user, one of the biggest things that I loved about Mainstage was that it switched patches gracefully, meaning you could switch patches and the previous one would die away naturally, depending on the amount of time that you had set in your Mainstage preferences. That was great because you could have a patch for each song. You could have multiple patches per song, depending on how many sound changes you needed to go through. And you could advance from one to the next, and all those changes would happen naturally, and there wouldn't be any abrupt stops or starts. At least that's how it was supposed to work. There weren't supposed to be abrupt stops and starts, and there weren't supposed to be MIDI notes hung from scene to scene, from patch to patch. But as I started getting a more and more complex setup going with multiple virtual instruments, multiple tracks, I kept having issues with Mainstage, and I decided to look for something different. Now, I like to push boundaries, and I would like to believe that I pushed Mainstage to the max a little bit, as far as the number of channels, the routing, running tracks, and things like that. And I just wasn't able to get the performance that I needed. Now, that's nothing bad about Mainstage. I still love Mainstage. It's great. But it just wasn't working for me. So I decided to try Ableton. Decided that when I could run through an entire set and not even reach 12% of my CPU, I decided it was a winner. So then my next step was to find a way to be able to switch patches gracefully and stay in complete control of the program, whether I'm running instruments, software instruments live, or tracks, or both, whatever. So let me show you what I've done. As we all know, you can insert a MIDI track, and let's wait for that to come up here. I don't know where that came up. There it is. We can insert a MIDI track. We can drag in an instrument. I'm just going to drag in the default Silent here. And you'll notice that by default, it's accepting MIDI from all MIDI sources on all channels. Now let's leave monitor set to auto. Let me change the audio to the master so you can hear it. And then let's make sure the track is armed like it is, and we can play. And we can hear the awesome default patch. Well, that's great. How do we turn that on or off? Well, we can arm or disarm the track, but there's a problem with that. If I'm sustaining a note with the pedal held and I turn that off, it's essentially stuck. I've released everything here. I don't have a pedal held down. I don't have a note held down. And it doesn't stop till you re-enable the track and depress the pedal or the note to send the note again with the off command. So that's a little bit of a problem. I can't control my channel strips that way when I'm playing live. So the second option would be to change the MIDI monitoring to in so that it's always receiving MIDI, just like that, and then use the activate or deactivate buttons here to turn that on or off. Now you'll notice it doesn't do anything with the MIDI signal, but it does cut the audio in and out, and that's not graceful either. Especially if you have other effects like delay or reverb added to your instrument chain here. As soon as you mute that track, all audio stops, and you have a nice choppy transition. I don't like that either, so let's just not do that. Let me show you how I like to have mine set up. I like to separate audio from MIDI. I don't like those default channel strips that are hybrid tracks where they've got MIDI coming in, getting sent to an instrument, and then it comes out as audio. I want to separate that out so I can have complete control of my audio routing as well as my MIDI routing. So what I've done here is, let me start over here. Let me show you my piano channel here. On my piano MIDI track, I've got Contact set up, and I have two pianos loaded. I've got Alicia's keys on MIDI channel 1, and I've got the Giant on MIDI channel 2. Now you'll notice on this channel strip, I don't have any MIDI input selected. That's because I don't want it receiving MIDI from anywhere unless I specifically tell it to. So that's the first step. I am keeping the instrument over here. I'm not going to do anything with this channel strip at all. What I'm going to do is come over here, and you'll notice I have a second keys channel strip set up. And this is a MIDI track only, doing only MIDI control. So here I've got an instrument rack set up. On this instrument rack, I have two different external instruments here. The first external instrument is being sent to my piano's track, my contact channel, on channel 1. And my second external instrument is being sent to MIDI channel 2. And that corresponds with Alicia's keys and the Giant. By using the chain selector here, I can change which external instrument is active here. In the 0 position, I don't have anything set up there, so that's off. I am playing and I don't have anything. As soon as I move that chain selector to position 1, I am now getting audio sent over to contact on MIDI channel 1. As soon as I move that chain selector to slot number 2, I am now getting audio sent over to the Giant. So now, let's look at why the chain selector is a good way to control your audio here. You could map this chain selector control to a knob or a button or something, but then you have to set a minimum, maximum range, and it's really hard to dial a very specific number. So I like to do it with clips. So let's make a MIDI clip on my MIDI channel here that controls this chain selector. Now what you can do is make sure you have that chain selector highlighted. You can see it's got the little corner brackets indicating that's the control that has my mouse focused right now. And then if we double click up here, I'm going to double click on an empty scene. You'll notice that it brings up a new clip, and it has the keys rack chain selector already set up for envelope control. Now I'm going to use this envelope to control the position of that chain selector. So this clip, just for practical purposes, I'm going to call this 1, just so that we know it's moving that chain selector to the 1 position. Then I'm going to set the actual value by dragging the little pink line down here up to the 1 position. Now if we go back here, we can see my chain selector is in 0, and as soon as I fire off this clip, it moves to the 1 position. And that's all that I have going on here. I have a default clip up here called off. It's got my chain selector set to 0. My C3 clip has it set to 1, and my Giant clip has the chain selector value set to 2. So now I can map these. As you can see, I have each one of these clips mapped to a button on my keyboard. I've got a Bluetooth keyboard sitting right on top of my keyboard controller, so I don't have to turn to the side to my computer or anything. I can just hit a button and it goes. So by pressing that key, I can turn that off or select between Alicia's keys or the Giant. So let's see that now. I'm going to play Alicia's keys, and you'll notice that chain selector is nice and smooth. When I fire off the Giant, the previous one continues to die away naturally because the channel has been active the whole time. We've just redirected where the MIDI is going. Now it's going to the Giant. Back to Alicia's keys. So we have a nice smooth way of changing where our MIDI channel is being sent. Let's move on to Omnisphere. I have 3 different Omnisphere channel strips with 3 different instances of Omnisphere. And the reason I do that is because each Ableton channel strip can only access one CPU core. So I don't want an instrument rack with multiple instances of Omnisphere all running at the same time, because it's only going to use one CPU core, and I would probably max that out. So on my default Omnisphere channel strip, wrong one, there we go. Let's see what I've got in Omnisphere here. I've got this one set to live mode. I have pretty much most of my default patches here. I've got a warm pad, an airy pad, some strings, a low cello type of thing here. And just to show you what else I've got a second Omnisphere instance. This one's actually loaded up for Wake. I've got some synth leads, well, the synth lead set up here. And my third Omnisphere channel has some other stuff here. It's had some custom pads and some custom strings for another song that we were doing. So anyway, on my Omnisphere MIDI control here, I've got an instrument rack set up as well. You'll notice this external instrument is sending MIDI to Omnisphere 1. My second external instrument is sending it to Omnisphere 2. And my third one is sending it to Omnisphere 3. So Omnisphere 1 is kind of my default, my go-to Omnisphere instance. It has all my main patches. I have the live app set up on my iPad, so I can use live mode. Omnisphere 2 and 3 I keep reserved for song-specific sounds, where I only need to activate one sound, bring it in and out during different parts in the song. So I can use this Omnisphere MIDI control to control which instance of Omnisphere is receiving data. So right now, let me turn my keys back off. I've got Omnisphere off. Let's move to Omnisphere 1. So here you can see I've got my pad, my default go-to pad, coming out of Omnisphere instance 1. Now let's fire off Omnisphere 2. You can hear it continues to sustain until I release that pedal. But here, I've now got that synth lead that we saw, which happens to be the lead for Wake. And let's go back to Omnisphere 3. And I have another customized pad that I was using for a song. It's a version of the Warm and Blue that I had on my Omnisphere 1 there. But I can change which one of those Omnisphere instances receives MIDI there. Now let me show you how that all fits together in a live situation. On One Thing Remains, we start off with just the pad. It's got the piano, or the guitar riff through the whole intro and first verse. So I have my clips set up to turn my pianos off, turn my default Omnisphere on, turn off any Reason rewire channels that I might have. Actually, that's all that I have right now. I don't have anything else going on this scene. So when I fire that off, I have just pad. And you'll notice my second scene just adds piano to that as well. So I fire off that scene. I now have piano along with that pad. So let's move on down to Oh the Blood, which happens to start with just piano. So I fire that off, turns on my piano, turns off the pad. But at any given time, I can press the key on my keyboard and jump back up to fire off one of those clips to bring back one of my channels. I'm done with piano. Let's switch to just pad. And maybe we need a real high chimey giant here. Sorry, my mic stand got in the way there. So let me reset that and turn all my clips back off, and you can see I have nothing going on at the moment. So my way to switch patches gracefully in Ableton is to do it with clips controlling the chain selector, and by separating MIDI from the audio. I don't have any weird audio cutouts. I can let the delays and the reverbs trail off naturally. So let me scroll down and show you a few other things that you can do with the clips here. On Cornerstone, we start off with just a pad here, and my piano's turned off. So let me fire off this scene. You can hear it's just a pad, and then for the intro, we all know the piano part comes in. And you'll notice that has an octave doubler on it, and let me show you what I've done with that, because I want that octave doubler only on the intro or the turnarounds. And that's because I don't have a second keyboard player to play pianos and pads. I have to accomplish all of that from one keyboard. So I don't really want a really high pad underneath that whole thing. I just want to sustain one note with the pad and have the piano doubled. So I like to cheat sometimes. Well, it's not really cheating if you're using it for a specific purpose. But over here on my keys control, you'll notice I have an octave doubler. And that octave doubler is only affecting the MIDI being sent to my keys rack. So my pad stays the same, it's not doubled, only the keys are doubled. So this particular clip, you'll notice, it has the chain selector being controlled and set to position 1, and it also has the octave doubler being turned on. So as I go through Cornerstone, I start off with just a pad. I can fire off the next scene. And my verse scene has the clip with that octave doubler turned back off. And if I were to go back to the intro, you can hear my doubler is turned back on. So all of those MIDI controls can be controlled with clips, organized into scenes, fired off with buttons, and it's super easy. You can actually change an entire keyboard, layers, splits, all kinds of things just with using clips. So let me show you something else here that I've done with clips. We did Wake recently, and you'll notice that the main synth comes in during the pre-chorus. And let me fire this guy off here. It has that lead coming in on the pre-chorus. Now, this is a personal preference. As a band director, I don't like that shift where it goes from really low dynamics to everything full out. I like to have a song build and create tension and shift dynamically from part to part. So during that pre-chorus, I like to have that lead swept up with a filter. I like to put a low-pass filter on it, sweep it down, and then as the song develops, we move closer to the chorus, have that lead open up, with no filter applied. And what I've done here, I have that lead coming through Omni 2 here. I've set up a filter just past the Omnisphere instance here, and I am controlling the frequency with this clip. So let me open this clip so you can see I am controlling my auto filter frequency, and I am starting it at 1.26 kilohertz over the course of an 8-bar clip, opening it up to where it doesn't really apply at all. So let me fire off this intro and you can hear what I have going on. I have silent patch with that default pulsing pad throughout the whole thing. And then in my right hand, I have the lead setup. So when I fire off this intro, here we go. And let's fire off the pre-chorus, and you can hear the lead come in. And as I play, you can hear it open up. And by the time it gets to the chorus, the filter's completely wide open, and I have the entire lead coming out there. And that, I think, is just really, really cool. I don't have to worry about losing a hand to control a knob that's controlling my filter. I can automate all of that through a clip that's controlling a MIDI envelope. To describe MainStage and Ableton, I like to say that MainStage makes complicated things fairly easy. It's pretty user-friendly. It's easy to see what's going on. When I switch to Ableton, I like to say that Ableton makes very complex things easy and very simple things very complex. Like this graceful patch switching. But by using all these clips, separating the MIDI control from the audio, I found that I have even better control of everything that goes on with this whole matrix. With all my clips and channel strips and all this stuff, I have more control than I ever had in MainStage. You know, because you would try to set up a instrument at the concert level or the set level for it to carry through multiple patches. And this, all you do is just either leave the clip on or off. It's a lot more granular control, a lot more in-depth. And that's how I do it. Now, part of the beauty of Ableton is that there are a million ways to do one little thing. So this is the way that I have found to switch patches gracefully. This is absolutely fantastic for me. Once you get it set up this way, it's really easy. It may seem pretty complex at first. As it is right now, I have over 45 channel strips here. That's both audio and MIDI combined. But initially, it may be a little more work to get the framework set up this way. But once it's set up, and you can just drag and drop sounds, and once you're familiar with creating clips for controlling everything, I can put an entire set together in an hour or less. Yeah, as long as it's not a new sound that I have to design or something like that. So anyway, I hope that's been helpful. Let me know if there's anything else I can explain or anything that I can go into further detail on. Keep it up, guys. Keep playing. And most importantly, have fun.